Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So I'm sure that recently you have been hearing some chatter or reading or listening to the news, and you've been hearing about these Supreme Court rulings that are affecting everybody, not just the trucking industry. So today I wanted to break it down for you guys so you have a better idea of what these rulings are and what they mean. So let's dive right in. Ready? Let's go. So first, we have to talk about a little bit of a backstory, specifically Chevron versus the Natural Resources Defense Council, because that's where it all started back in 1984, 40 years ago. And it's quite interesting. This all started with fishermen suing over the fact that federal rules required them to pay for observers to monitor their catch. But what ended up happening was a ruling that the courts should side with the federal agency interpretation of a law as long as it's a reasonable interpretation of what Congress intended. Now let's fast forward to the end of last month, where Overdrive states, two decisions in late June, just before the court's annual recess, undo decades of legal precedent and case law. The decisions could seriously diminish the ability of federal agencies such as the FMCSA and the Environmental Protection Agency to write regulations for businesses and individuals. So, how does this all relate to trucking? Well, first and foremost, according to Overdrive, within trucking, FMCSA benefited from the so-called Chevron defense during the ELD mandate's day in court at the Chicago-based Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. FMCSA at that time argued it deserved leeway to implement the mandate over OOIDA's argument that ELDs could continue to open drivers up to unacceptable harassment, even with FMCSA efforts to address the issue with separate rulemakings in tandem with its ELD mandate. So basically, it helped them push through the need for electronic logging devices. So yeah, the Supreme Court basically undid that. And the way the American Trucking Association interprets this is, and I quote, "With the overruling of Chevron, agencies will get less deference from the courts in the way they interpret the often broad and ambiguous statutes through which Congress authorizes them to issue regulations." And they continue, "That should mean courts will now be more empowered to correct agencies when they overstep that authority. And equally, if not more importantly, it should translate to greater long-term regulatory stability for the trucking industry and less of the back and forth we see at some agencies on some issues every time the executive branch changes hands." In other words, carriers now have a little bit more power when it comes to the regulations in trucking and challenging them. So Overdrive, and I think this is important, they gave an example of how this overruling works now. Now, this is a super long example, so I am shortening it as much as possible. So they say, let's say, for example, Congress passes a law requiring the testing and treatment of sleep disorders for CDL medical certification. The text of the bill does not clearly define what a sleep disorder is. The FMCSA decides to interpret this whole idea of sleep disorder to include the occasional workday nap. Consequently, thousands of drivers are forced to undergo expensive sleep tests simply for taking naps. Sounds crazy, but this was attempted in 2013. So now let's say that the OOIDA files a petition in the US Court of Appeals because of the crazy and unnecessary financial as well as time burden it puts on truckers. And in that petition, they say that sleep disorder was addressing some extreme health concerns, such as insomnia or restless leg syndrome, not the typical drowsiness that most of us feel during the day. Now, under the prior Chevron doctrine, before it was overruled, the federal court would rule in favor of the FMCSA. Specifically, the court would state that, assuming it's reasonable, the federal agency holds the power to make that interpretation. The logic is that the FMCSA, not some random judge, is more equipped and knowledgeable in making such decisions. But now that this was overruled, then the court could possibly rule in the favor of the drivers. Now, this shocked the crap out of me when I found out, and I know that I shouldn't be surprised, but it still shocked me that before this, courts would rule in the favor of the federal agency because they were assuming that these federal agencies know what they are doing. Now, from personal experience, and I'm sure many of you share this experience, the disconnect that exists between those who make the rules at the FMCSA and actual truck drivers is insane. So this whole thing was insane to me when I found out. But that is not all. The Supreme Court really decided to sucker punch those federal agencies with a second ruling about the statute of limitations. Now, before, federal law set a 6-year deadline to challenges of the regulations that were implemented. But that 6-year clock started ticking from the moment that the regulation took effect. So if you were trying to challenge a federal regulation that took effect in 2017, it would be dismissed because the statute of limitations has already passed. Now, that 6-year clock starts ticking when the plaintiff is adversely affected by the regulation. So even if the regulation was implemented in, let's say, 1950, but you are adversely affected by it in 2024, you got until 2030 to challenge it. So how is this all going to pan out? Well, only time will tell. But I do agree with the numerous articles that say that courts will be filled with different lawsuits and that these federal agencies will start now going through all these regulations to see how well they would hold up in court, which may create a moment or two of uncertainty. So that's what I have for you guys. I hope this makes a little bit more sense now if you were confused on the subject. If you have any more information that I did not include in this video, please feel free to comment down below. I would be super interested in reading it. Other than that, I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. See you in the next video.